Hello, everybody. This is Gregory. I hope you're doing well. I got a little cough, little congestion here, so I'm drinking some tea. Just finished recording an episode here. I got the mic. I hope you guys are doing well. I understand that the large majority who are going to watch this will watch this later on. I understand that. That's part and parcel of having a very small active viewer base, which is totally fine if you want to watch this later. But I wanted to do a quick 30-minute live stream on how to deal with lapsed family members, because I think a lot of people deal with this. Now, before I begin, call in if you have a question on anything Catholic related, anything about apologetics or Catholic living, just anything Catholic related you want to ask me a question or comment on something going on in the world. You're more than welcome to do that. Also, my Instagram is Catholic_or_Protestant. Let me show you what that looks like. Very simple premise. I started about a month ago. That you can get me to the triple digits. I got 90 followers. I just post a picture a day of a church. Let's look at this one. And you tell me if it's Catholic or mainline Protestant. Based on, I would say it's mostly based on the internal, but some of these are tricky. Like some of the more garish ones are obviously going to be Catholic, like that's a Catholic one. But look, some of these are tricky. I'll throw in these obvious ones that are going to be like, oh, that's obviously Catholic. For some reason, it's not showing them all. Here's another one. This could be really just ugly Catholic, or this could be mainline, like Lutheran. And I'll get comments. This one was, in fact, Anglican. I'll get comments. Well, Gregory, that's got an altar. Gregory, that's got a tabernacle. Gregory, and I'm like, well, I mean, some of you guys don't know, like mainline Protestants, especially the older ones, like Anglicans, Episcopalians, they do believe they don't necessarily believe in the real presence. They have the idea of consubstantiation, but they will have a host, and many of them do have a tabernacle. And so, in some of them, especially the Anglicans, will use incense. So sometimes when I show pictures, you think it's going to be like traditional Catholicism, and no, that's actually Anglicanism. But either way, check out, subscribe, or follow, whatever you do on Instagram. I think it's follow, right? Follow over there if you like. So going back to it, I think it's important to have like a little episode on lapsed family members, because most people have lapsed family members, and it's either they're lapsed Catholics. I posted that poll yesterday asking, what's your background? Are you a cradle Catholic, essentially always practicing? Are you a revert who left the faith and kind of did nothing and came back? Or maybe you went to an evangelical church and then came back. Are you a recent convert to Catholicism, or are you a non-Catholic? So a lot of you guys are going to have family members who have either left the Catholic faith and have gone, they call it the non-affiliated religious, or they've gone atheist, or they've gone evangelical, Lutheran. I mean, normally most Catholics who leave do not go to mainline like Methodism, Lutheranism, Anglican. They mostly don't. They're either going to go, depending on their faith and their knowledge of Catholicism. The ones who know more will maybe go to ROCOR, like Russian Orthodox abroad. But the typical poorly catechized Catholics will typically go evangelical, non-denominational churches. So you might have some family members who just went atheist or agnostic. In other words, agnostic is kind of like maybe there's a God, but I'd rather watch Netflix, and that's more important to me instead of actually investigating. It's like they almost bother me more than the atheists, because at least the atheists have an impassioned position on something, whereas the agnostics, you're like, who cares? Well, what ice cream do I have in the fridge? So you might have a lapsed Catholic, you might of whatever form. I mean, it's pretty common. I would say, like, out of people I know, and again, this is anecdotal, people I know that were Catholic, most of them either have family members who just don't go to church, or they have family members who have homosexuals in them, and those people have left the church because of the way they think the church doesn't support homosexual marriage. We have a future episode on that coming out in about 6 weeks. Or they just left completely, or some of them have gone to the weird cults. Who knows? Some of them have just gone like New Age Catholic, where they don't go to mass, but they kind of have this syncretist view of Catholicism, where it's like the one that Oprah used to always push, the not purpose-driven life, the Abraham guy. Laws of attraction, this kind of like light Christianity, but really it's New Age masquerading as Christianity. Could be that. So what do we do? First, I think what you need to do is recognize a couple of things. You got to recognize that there's baggage. All family members have baggage. Now, not just their personal baggage, but they have baggage with each other. There are families that get along very well. And I would tell you this, I think anecdotally, again, it's anecdotal, that families that are large, like 4, 5, 6, 7 siblings, actually get along better than families with 1 or 2, I guess not 1, but 2 or 3. There's something about growing up in the big family that you guys grow up close. And that's not to say that there's never going to be tension or fighting amongst siblings, but understand there's always baggage when it comes to family. And if you look at the parent-child kind of bond, if it's your parents that left the faith, they're not really going to want to hear advice from the child that they created, that they raised, that remembered used to poop in their pants and all this thing, because you're still the kid. So if it's a parent that left, just understand you got that baggage. So they're not really going to listen to you there. And if it's siblings, well, siblings is a whole package. Now, it really depends on whether or not the siblings were getting along in middle school, high school, and so forth. If you guys never got along, I think that's going to be certainly more difficult if one of them leaves the faith and you try to talk to them about the faith, because they already don't like you. They might say that, I love you deep down. Like if you were drowning in a flood, I'm going to save you. They probably would. But if they don't like you, they're not really going to listen to you. So understand, like behind everything is the family baggage. And you can't ever underestimate the family baggage. The family baggage is there and it's exceedingly strong. So when you are trying to talk to lapsed family members about coming back to the church, for example, just understand that you are not considered to be objective, independent. And in many ways, it's better if you weren't family. If they were considering to come back, that they would be more receptive to a stranger telling them to come back than you, because they look at you and they have a history with you, right? To understand, they have a history with you going back to when you were very young. And especially if there was tension, or you've always had you always thought you were better than me, or you were the holy roller, who are you to judge me? Or if it's the older sibling and you're the younger one, they'll always have that chip, like you're always the younger one. So since you're the younger one, you can't ever be right about anything, politics or religion or whatever. So you're dealing with that dynamic. I think it's better if you're the older one and it's the younger sibling that left. You always had good relationships with each other. And I think that's a better dynamic, because inherently they're going to look up to you because you are the older sibling. And that's really only if you guys got along. So again, if you grew up not getting along, I think there's problems. Now, when it comes to cousins and so forth, it's a little different dynamic, because typically you don't see them that often. But I would still say the same thing applies. The number one factor, I think, is in that kind of law of propinquity is how well you guys got along when you were younger. Okay, so that being said, let's say you're a 25, 30-year-old Catholic and you have a younger sibling, or let's say you're 35, whatever, and you have a younger sibling who is no longer practicing the faith. What can you do? How can you bring them back? I think the number one thing to understand is, and I'll just jump to number 4 here, is you can't change people. You can't change people. People as a whole, we have intellect and will, of course, but lots of times people react based on other emotions, more of the hindbrain emotions like fear, insecurity, jealousy, rage. And so going to a family member, and I think men have a harder time understanding this than women, because men, we tend to be more robotic and logical. Going to a family member who's left the faith, or even worse, says bad things about the faith to you or family at Thanksgiving or Christmas, or they post stuff on social media about how they hate the faith because the faith doesn't support whatever social issue that they've been indoctrinated in public school education or university education on. Sitting them down and be like, these are the 20 points as to why you should return to the faith. Point number one, the church was founded by Jesus Christ. Any other church you went to is not. Point number two, atheism is really an offshoot of cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism wanted to destroy Christianity. You go, number three, and then you think they're just going to sit there and just be taking notes, right? Is that going to happen? That's not going to happen. But I think men have problems more than women understanding this, because men, in general, this is why men are from Mars, women are from Venus. It's like men, we see things much more logically than women, I think. And so we just assume everybody sees things the way we see things. And I think women, of course, are kind of see like a word this way. And so we assume that too. This is why there's always going to be some inherent tension between the sexes. And the only way to really kind of go through the mist of the cultural Marxist nonsense is to understand that men and women are equal, created in the eyes of God, but we each have separate independent strengths. And like the yin and the yang, for lack of a Christian example, we work best when we understand that we're like the Wonder Twins from the Justice League. We work best when we come together and we each have our strength and weakness, and the other defers to the other in their strength and in their weaknesses. And I think that's the best thing to do. But sitting them down with the 20-point PowerPoint as to why they should come back, I mean that's not going to work. And of course, you are convicted, to use the Protestant term here, you are convicted in your beliefs that the church is the true church, and that you really love your sibling or your whoever it is, your parent or your child if you're older, and you really want them to come back. But understand, you can't affect that change. It's the Holy Spirit that does that. It's the Holy Spirit that brings them back. It's not you. You could be a conduit, you could be an avatar, but you ain't going to be doing it. And that is the sin of hubris, to think that I can do it. And you gotta be careful too, because you don't want to verge on proselytizing, because proselytizing is wrong. We should not be proselytizing. The church condemns proselytization going back to very early on. And certainly I think people have this misconception, especially in the age of expansion and colonialism, that the Catholic Church went to all these places and said, you got to be baptized or we're going to kill you. And that is not true. That is not true. You can go back to the 1500s and read people like Bartholomew de las Casas, these indigenous supporters. And well, this is a separate topic, but if you ever read, what's his name? Thomas Woods, How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, he talks about like the whole history of jurisprudence and human rights came from the Catholic Church, came from this time, especially in the kind of high medieval scholastic period, and certainly in the 16th century, when they were debating and discussing, these theologians, like, how do we treat these indigenous people? But we never said, you got to be Catholic or we're going to kill you. Now, were there like certain Catholic lay conquistadors or whatever who in some specific region said that? Of course, but that's not a representative of the faith. You'll never find a Catholic writing that says that baptism or death is condoned. No, because first of all, that baptism isn't even valid, because baptism must come from free will and free consent. And if there's no free will and free consent, it's not even a valid baptism. It's a baptism under duress. So it's not even valid. But either way, going back to now, like, you can't force this on your loved one. It's not going to work. So go in the kind of more erudite, high level, here's my PowerPoint bullet point presentation ain't going to work. And you appealing to insulting them about whatever they're believing in isn't going to work either, because they're going to get defensive. And again, they always see you as the sibling. Oh, I remember you when you were, fornicating with your girlfriend, or I remember you when you were, smoking pot or whatever. They're always going to remember those things. Who are you? You think you can judge me? I remember when you were doing all these sins. Now you think you're righteous. You think your shit doesn't stink. Da, da, da. You're going to get all these kind of visceral responses to it. No, understand. You can't change people. Now, what can you do though? What are some actionable things that you can do? Because there's nothing you can do to change these people. Like with anyone with a vice or an addiction, only they can change themselves, hopefully through the intervention of God. But what can you do to improve the chances of them coming back? Well, I think going back to number 2 is going to be practice your faith. If they can see that your faith if they can see that your faith has made you a better person, that your faith brings happiness and joy, all the fruits of the Holy Spirit, let's say, and peace and so forth, patience to your life, that is an attractive point. Because look, the atheists aren't going to agree with this, but life not believing in God is kind of a bleak life. It certainly turns into a hedonistic, self-centered life where you're just pursuing the concupiscent pleasures of the flesh. But ultimately, it's an empty life. So they might not admit that, though, of course, but when they see that they themselves are living it up, think of like Dorian Gray from the old Oscar Wilde novel, or whatever example. Think of the prodigal son. When he's wasting all the money with his friends, right? He understands on one level that it's an empty life, because at the beginning, it's just like when kids get a gallon of ice cream, they love it. But after a little while, it's just empty. So then they realize on one level, though they might not admit it, that, hey, living this life of just all this hedonistic pleasures of the flesh is not quite adding up to anything that's interesting. And then they look at you and they see that you're engaged in prayer, and that you have these virtues like temperance and prudence and justice, and that you have these fruits of the Holy Spirit, that you exude this joy, this serenity, this peace, because you submit to God's will, and that you're active in your prayer life. And if you're active in your prayer life and you're taking your faith seriously, you're doing works of mercy and you're helping others and all these things. That is going to be attractive, because they're going to be like, even though they might not admit it to you, because again, this is sibling rivalry and there's pride involved, they're going to be like, I want that. I want that. I've lived the Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was a major hedonist, even though he did convert to Catholicism at the end of his life. It's like, I've lived the opium den stripper life, and it didn't bring me anything. It didn't bring me peace, because atheism doesn't bring you any of that. I want that. So the number one thing is practicing your faith, emulating your faith. And you don't necessarily need to say, oh, it's my relationship with Jesus Christ and my relationship with the sacraments that makes me happy and peaceful and all these things, because then it sounds like you're bragging. You don't need to say anything regarding that. You just being a light, right? Just a natural light. And what does Christ say? You don't put a light under a table, right? You let it to show to everybody. You'll just be a natural light. And it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that your life has to be perfect, right? We all struggle. We all take up the white robe of martyrdom on one level. We offer things up, offer our problems up. But you practicing your faith, you, especially when you're around them, because maybe you're not around them all the time, but you never being judgmental, you never berating, you never maligning. Think of what Christ talks about, like in Matthew 5-7, the Sermon on the Mount, like how we're supposed to treat other people, right? Forgiving your enemies and not bragging, and again, avoiding the works of the flesh mentioned in Galatians, and just living your life. Think of Romans 12, which was one of my favorite sections of the New Testament, where Paul talks about like how you should treat others, right? You overcome evil with good, and so forth. And you doing these things are going to be natural things that attract people to you, and therefore to you, to the faith, because they realize that it's the faith that's making you do that. And of course, I would say connected to that is like you're not overindulging in vices, because a lot of people who leave the faith overindulge in vices. But if you're not drinking too much, you're not smoking too much, you're not cussing, you're not maligning, you're treating people with respect, all these things, in addition to having an active prayer life, I think will help. Now, so practicing your faith. Now, let's say it's somebody who's not lapsed into atheism or moral relativism, secularism. Let's say it's somebody that's lapsed into evangelicalism or some offshoot of Protestantism. The same thing can apply here. Practice your faith, practice your Catholic faith. Now, concomitant with that is answer questions. Now, what you're not going to hear me tell you is, going back to the early part of this episode, is proselytizing. Oh, you're a non-denominational evangelical. Oh, you're a Mormon. What? You actually believe there's no archaeological evidence? You believe God was a man? What? You do all that weirdo baptism of the dead? What? You guys are crazy. What? You believe in sola scriptura? Boy, that's so stupid. How can you really think you're going to get people who are lapsed of the faith to come back when you're insulting them? That's not going to work. That goes back to proselytizing, right? It's more, and I've made this mistake. Do not get me wrong. I have made this mistake with people in my life where I think like I can single-handedly bring them to Catholicism. So I can speak from experience. You insulting their faith is only going to make them, get defensive, but ultimately it's going to undermine their whole view of Christianity, and they just might fall into atheism. But when it comes to like proselytizing, hardcore proselytizing, you really don't find Catholics who do this, because most Catholics don't know their faith well enough to proselytize or care enough about their faith to proselytize. I think the proselytizing Catholics are going to be the madrads mostly. And you find this with the atheists, certainly, and then you're going to find this with the evangelicals for sure. The evangelicals are notorious for proselytizing. And how do you know the difference between proselytizing and just evangelizing? Well, proselytizing is about you. You don't care about the person you're talking to. It's about getting another notch on your belt. Oh, I brought another person into the faith. It's all about undermining their faith, bringing them into the faith. It's me. It's all exceedingly self-centered. So you don't want to do that. So what you want to do is answer questions. And I think this is the most effective way to bring anybody into Catholicism or anybody back into God is it's a two-pronged approach. Excuse me. Is going to be I would say three-pronged. It's practice your faith, as we mentioned before. Number 2 is answer questions. And number 3 is defend the faith. We are expected to defend the faith. That's 1 Peter 3. Make a defense of the faith in charity. It's supposed to be in charity too. But answer questions. So if you have a lapsed member who fell into atheism or fell into whatever Protestant denomination, now granted, they did grow up Catholic, but the fact that they left, typically they leave because they feel like they're, they weren't fed. This is something that you commonly hear, that they left because they weren't being fed. You hear this about a lot of Christians in general, why they left. Oh, the church is full of hypocrites. We have episodes here addressing all these things, but they'll say like, oh, I wasn't fed. The church is bigoted. The church hates gays. The church needs to catch up to modern times. And a lot of these answers are really rooted in they were just poorly catechized and they never were taught. And who is the number one person who's supposed to educate the faith to children? It's parents, right? It's just like public school education. And we just punt everything to strangers. And so it's the same thing. We just punt them to CCD school, Sunday school, or the homilies, and just expect like through some principle of osmosis that if we just take them to mass for 18 years straight, that they're going to know everything about the Catholic faith. That's ridiculous to think that. Now, you should take them to mass, of course, but that's your job. It's the parent's job. And certainly you should take them to Sunday school and all that. But even that's typically not enough. So when people leave the faith, it's typically because they were poorly catechized. And even if they leave the faith to evangelicalism, it's the same thing. I mean, when they fall for the sola scriptura, sola fide stuff, and we've talked about it before, Protestantism is essentially lazy Christianity. They're going to want to hear this because it's an easy message. So I can just sin all I want. I'm still saved. I can say the sinner's prayer and I'm still saved. Sign me up. So though I can get married and divorced, and then marry again and get divorced, and marry and divorce. Sign me up. It's not as rigorous of a life. So a lot of that is rooted on just being poorly catechized. But if you have family members who will either make statements about the Catholic faith that's wrong, either because they know better, but they want to dig you. Like, you believe, like, let's say they became evangelical. Well, you believe that works get you into heaven. You Catholics. It's like, well, first of all, don't say you Catholics because you were baptized and you have all the sacraments. It's really we Catholics. You're just one confession away from being a Catholic again. You're a Catholic in exile. So I wouldn't say you Catholic. So when they're either going to make snide comments like that, or they'll just ask legitimate questions. But if they make a snide comment, like, oh, you guys believe that that works can get you into heaven. See, at that point, you need to, and I would say this, and do it with charity, and you're smiling, don't be like, what should that's not going to work. No. You say, actually, brother, sister, that's not true. We condemned Pelagianism 1700 years ago. So no, you're not going to find a Catholic anywhere in any Catholic writing that works alone get us into heaven. Now, you need to know that. That helps to if you know that truth, that works will get you heaven. And again, this goes back to just having like a basic level of Catholic knowledge. But that when they're snarky like that, you kind of have to look at a couple of things, because it's family members. Going back to the number one thing, it's baggage. There's a lot of family baggage going on there. You need to see if they're actually receptive to the truth. The number one way to get them back is you practicing your faith. But if their heart is hardened, then in some ways it's just better to be like, yeah, no, we don't believe that. Just don't even explain to them like Pelagianism and all these things. And we have an episode here, like, how do you deal with angry Protestants? It's the same thing. You kind of have to like read the situation. If you feel that they truly are receptive to learning about the faith, then I would engage with them. If they're not receptive, if they're just anti-Catholic bigots, just walk away, because nothing you say is going to be effective. And it's like dealing with cluster B rage people, like cluster B personality disorders. Like, nothing you say they're not going to be like, you know what, you're right, I'm going to become a Catholic right now. No, their heart is hard. With that being said, you might have family members who ask legitimate questions. So why do you believe the Pope is the head of the church? Or do you guys really worship Mary? Or why do you pray to the saints? And then answer the questions in charity. And you don't have to know everything. And there's going to be times you'll be like, I honestly don't know the answer to this question, but I'll look it up and I'll let you know. But answer the questions. So I think the two best ways to get a lapsed Catholic to come back to the faith that's in your family is practice your faith. I would say three things. Practice your faith, so it is a magnet to them. Like, oh, this hedonistic life that I had is kind of empty, and this person is living a life of virtue, and that in itself is going to be attractive, because everybody wants to live a life of virtue and peace and serenity. And I would tell you that you have that life more when you're a Christian. But so you practicing your faith, you also being respectful of wherever they went. If they became Jehovah or they're an atheist, do not be insulting wherever they came from. When they're talking, listen to what they're saying about whatever denomination, faith that they're in. Just be respectful and listen, and then just answer any questions that they have. And play the long game. This is family. Play the long game. Don't be the proselytizer who's like, I got to win this fight. We're having this debate at Thanksgiving, and I need to win, right? You're going to win the battle, lose the war. You need to think long term about, where is this person at? Where is your sibling at, your parent, whatever it is, your son, whatever they're at this point. And just, again, think of the long game. Practice your faith, answer questions, treat them with charity and respect. And you never know. The Holy Spirit could work through them in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I mean, you can listen to Catholic content and you're like, I haven't been in confession 57 years. I was an atheist, or I was jumping around Protestant denominations, and I came back to the faith when I was 75. mean, you hear these stories. You also hear stories of people who just die in car accidents and they're unrepentant sinners. So, I mean, on one level, I can totally understand if there are people who are like, this is time sensitive. I need to get them back into the bosom of Holy Mother Church for the sake of their soul. I would just tell you that, again, I would still play the long game, and I would just pray, of course, a lot. I typically pray to the Virgin Mary. I do a memorare for lapsed Christians in my life. Pray for the intercession of the saints to help you out. Of course, pray directly to Jesus and to the Holy Spirit, to God the Father. Pray unceasingly. Pray for these people. And more importantly, just witness, just be a positive witness in their life. And maybe they'll come back, and maybe they won't come back. But ultimately, going back to number 4 is you can't change people. You can't change people. You can bring out the PowerPoint. You can berate them like a child. You ultimately cannot change these people. They're going to do what they want to do, and you just pray that eventually they'll persevere to the end, as Christ says, and eventually they'll go into heaven. And at the same time, too, you got to think, why are you looking at the speck in their eye if you're not looking at the log in your own? And that, like, if we're so consumed with making little brother a work of mercy, a project, I got to get him back into the faith, and then you're neglecting your own spiritual life. You're neglecting your own road to salvation. That would be pretty stupid, right? That'd be pretty myopic. So, be the best witness you can be. If you're having an affair on your husband and you're chastising your lapsed brother for cohabiting, you probably want to address yourself first. But also, just take care of yourself, work on your own salvation, and overall, again, just be a good witness to the faith, and just at the end, just let go and let God. Yeah, relax. You got a 2x4. There you go. Just let go and let God and let the Holy Spirit work through them if it's going to happen. All right, guys. That's all I got to say, unless you guys want to call in or anything like that. We're going to finish it up today. Over here, if I don't have a guest, I like to keep these episodes around 30 minutes. And again, if any of you want to come on, I've done 3 or 4 interviews. I do have one with Novus Ordo Watch, the guy over there, Tradcath. He said he wanted to come on, but I haven't reached out to him. I have a couple other people. I've just been kind of slacking, and I do like to just bring in regular people. But if you ever want to come on and have a discussion, please reach out to me. Probably the best way to reach me would be on Instagram. Probably that's the best way to reach me. All right, guys, that's all I got to say. Take care. God bless, and pray.